In this tutorial, we're going to look at how we can create this basic sign that you can see here. We're going to look at how we can draw up the vectors for the Avalon nameplate. We're going to take those vectors and we're going to look at applying some toolpaths to them to create the sign that you can see here. We're going to be primarily looking at the pocket toolpath and the profile toolpath, where we'll finish off by showing you how you can save out your toolpaths. So let's go to File, Close. So to start a new file, we'll go to our Startup Tasks and use this option here to create a new file. Here we're able to set up the dimensions for our job from within this job setup form. First off, we can assign whether we want that to be a single-sided job or a double-sided job. In this case, we're just going to go with a single-sided job here. Next up, we specify our job size, where we enter in the width, height and thickness for the material that we plan to use. In this case, we're going to go with a width of 7.5 and we want a height here of 3 inches and a material thickness of 1/4 inch, which I can type all of that information in. If I want to switch to metric, I can click on this option. In this case, we're going to work in inches. Then we move on to our Z0 position, whether that's on the material surface or on the machine bed. In this case, I want that to be on the material surface. You can see that's indicated by this red dot on the top surface of the graphic here. And we can also move down now and take a look at the XY 0 datum position. Okay, so that's your Z position and this is our X0, Y0 position. In which case it's currently set to the center of our job because our icon is highlighted here. We can change that by clicking on any one of these corners. And with each click, you'll see that the graphic updates to show the position in relation to your job. And we can also see that represented here in the 2D view by this red square. We're going to go with the center here just whilst we design our part, and then we could go ahead and press OK. So to start with, we're going to draw out the basic shapes for our sign. And so we've got some tools to help us do that. So we're going to start by drawing the outer border of our sign. To help us, we're going to come over to the Create Vectors section of the Drawing tab, and we're going to use the Draw Rectangle option. So here we are able to just free draw directly into the 2D view by using the left mouse key and dragging that across to create the rectangle size that you'd like. In this case, I'm just going to show you how we can just type in exact measurements and see those vectors appear within the 2D view. Okay, so first off, we need to specify the anchor point for our shape that we're going to create. So we want our anchor point to be in the center of our rectangle, where we want the center of our rectangle to be in the center of our job, which we can see, judging by our cursor here, would be at X0, Y0. And so in this case, we're going to type in X0 and then Y0. So we know the center of our rectangle will be at this point here. Next up, we can specify a corner type. We can have square corners, radius external corners, and radius internal corners. In which case, I'd like to go for a radius external corner, having a radius of 0.15 inches in here. Then we specify the size. So for the width, we're going to go with 6.8, and then for the height, we're going to go with 2.4. And then we could go ahead and press create, and you can see it's assigned that rectangle where the center of the rectangle is positioned at X0, Y0. It has a width of 6.8 inches and a height of 2.4 inches with radius corners with the radius of 0.15. Next up, I'd like to create the inner border. So staying in the draw rectangle form, I'm just going to alter some settings to create the inner border. So I'm going to go the same anchor point at X0, Y0. We want the radius external corner using the same radius of 0.15, except we're just going to make this a little smaller. So the width for this is going to be 6.5 in this case, and then the height of this is going to be 2.1. and then we could go ahead, press create, and you can see that that's been added there. So now that we're done creating the shapes for our Avalon sign, we can close out of the Draw Rectangle tool. Next up, we can start to think about the text Avalon that we're going to have positioned within the centre of our sign. So to draw in text, we come over to the Create Vectors section of the Drawing tab, and this time we're going to use the Draw Text icon. If we click on that, that's going to open up the Draw Text tool, in which case I can click anywhere within my job and I'm able to see where this text is going to be positioned. I have a good indication of the size of the text looking at this blue dotted line, and I can see where that text is going to be aligned. In this case, it'll be in the centre of our box representation that we've got here because of this blue square indicator here. If I wanted that to be the left, you can see it will change there, and to the right, we can have it there. In this case, we'll go for the centre. We can choose our font, so from the drop-down list it will pull out all the fonts on your PC, in which case I'd like to use Arial, and then we could simply go ahead and just type in the name Avalon, and then we can close out. We can start to think about positioning that perfectly within our sign. So to do that, we're going to select our text, which we can see is already selected, that's why it's highlighted in pink. We're going to hold the Shift key down and we're going to select the inner border. And I'd like to align our text to the centre of the inner border. So over to Transform Objects, we have an icon here called Align Selected Objects, where we're able to align objects to other objects. In which case, I'd like to align the Avalon text to this inner border. So we're going to use this option here, Align Selected Objects to the last item in the selection, that being the border. And we're going to use the centre option. So that's aligning that centrally, vertically and horizontally to the last object. And if we click on that, you can see it's done that there for us. So now we can close out, and that's pretty much the design side of our sign complete. So at this stage, we can start to think about transferring this design into Toolpaths that we can then go ahead and machine on our CNC. So now we can switch from the Drawing tab over to the Toolpaths tab. To do that, we can simply use this icon here, and that's just going to temporarily disable the Design tab on the left-hand side, and it's now opened up the Toolpaths options on the right-hand side. And the first and most important thing we need to do now is just check over our material setup before we get started. So we're going to use the Set option here. So starting at the top, our material thickness hasn't changed. We're still working with a 1/4 inch material thickness here, so we're going to leave that as is. XY datum position, now I'd like this in correspondence to what my machine is set up to, which in my case is actually in the lower left hand corner. So we had it in the centre just to design our part. Sometimes I prefer it in the centre to create our designs where everything's referenced from 0, 0 being in the centre of your job. But now that we're transferring this to our machine, we need to change that to the lower left hand corner, and you're going to set this up according to your own CNC setup. Next up, we need to set up our Z0 position. Again, I'd like to keep that to the material surface here, so I'm going to leave that as it is within this form. Then we move on down to our rapid Z gaps above our material. So this is where we check our gaps for the clearance and the plunge settings. So the clearance is basically the height above the job at which it's safe for the cutter to move at rapid or maximum feed rate. And then the plunge is basically a gap that the tool will rapid down to during plunge moves. And so I'm just going to leave these at 0.2. That seems safe enough for my particular setup, but you want to make sure that that's also appropriate for your own setup, ensuring that you're clearing a clamping mechanism that you may have on your job, so the tool doesn't go into those mechanisms. So please check over your own clearance and plunge settings, ensuring they're safe and appropriate for your machine. Then you want to check your home start position, ensuring that's starting off safely at X and Y. In my case, I'm going to have that X0, Y0, and the Z gap above the material is going to be 1/2 inch. And again, you want to make sure everything's safe according to your own machine setup. So once you're happy with that, you could go ahead and press OK. Now the first toolpath we're going to look at is a pocket toolpath. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at machining everywhere between the text and this inner border that we've got here. And we're going to specify how far down we're going to machine between the two so that we create this raised text effect from the word Avalon. So to do that, let's go over into Toolpath Operations and we're going to use the Pocket toolpath. So to start with, we need to select our vectors that we'd like to machine. So we're going to select the Avalon text and we're going to hold down the Shift key and select the inner border. This just means that we're telling the software we're going to machine everywhere between the text and the inner border here. First off, we need to specify a start depth. Our start depth is going to be at 0, so we're going to leave that here as 0. Let me specify our cut depth, so this is how far down we want to cut to. In which case, we'd just like to cut down 0.1 of an inch, so we'll type in 0.1 in there. Next up, we need to choose our tools. So the software has currently remembered some tools that I used in a previous session, so I'm going to press remove and remove again just to clear the tool list. In which case we can use the select option and that will open up the tool database. In which case we can go to our Imperial tools and then choose the appropriate tool that we'd like to use. In which case I'd like to make use of this 1/8 inch end mill. Here we're able to see some of the settings that we've got in there for our tool. These are the default settings that are shipped with the software. So we could go ahead and press select. Now, if you're wanting to edit some of those settings for the tool for this particular toolpath, you can do so by using the edit option over here. So here we're able to see all of the settings for this 1/8 inch tool for this particular toolpath that we're actually cutting. And so here we can see the diameter is 1/8 of an inch. We can see the number of flutes for that tool is 2. We've got the cutting parameters, so we've got a pass depth of 0.05 here, and we have a step over of 0.05, and we can edit any of these settings for this particular toolpath, and it won't affect the actual tool that we've got in our main tool database that you saw earlier when we used the select option. So let's say we actually wanted to have a 20% step over. Well, we can just type in 20% here, or you could alternatively actually put in the value 0.025. We can alter the spindle speed, so I'm going to just drop that down to 12,000 RPM. And then we can change the feed rate and plunge rate accordingly. So I might just up the feed rate here to 60 inches a minute. And obviously you're going to apply your own settings here for what's appropriate for your particular machine, the material that you're cutting into, and check that everything is safe and appropriate. Along with thinking about the actual tools that you're using as well. So now we can go ahead and press OK. Okay, so now that we've got our tool selected, we can move on down and we can think about how we're actually going to create this cutout, whether we do that in an offset strategy or whether we do that in a raster strategy. So a raster pattern will just go back and forth, kind of like in a snake motion. Okay, and you can alter the angle of that by altering the angle. So if you put that to 90, it would go up and down like that. And then an offset strategy would just go round and round and round until it completes the cutout, in which case you can alter whether that's in a climb or a conventional cut. Okay, in this case, we're just going to go with an offset cut here. And then if we wanted to, we could look at applying ramp plunge moves as well. So we could check that option here. And this just ensures that our tool will kind of drop in a ramp diagonally into the machine rather than just plunge vertically down into the material, so that it just helps keep the wear and tear of the tool. Okay, so it's just for the longevity of the tool, really. So here we could go ahead and say we want to just apply a ramp move of 0.5 inches in there. And then we could go ahead and we can give that a name, in which case we're just going to call this one Pocket, and we're just going to put my tool data in here, so 0.125 inches, and then go ahead and press calculate. And so this will automatically open up the preview toolpaths form where we're able to actually preview what that toolpath will look like. Here you can see lots of lines here, and this is showing us our toolpaths. So let's have a look at some of those for now. Okay, so there's a series of different coloured lines that we've got here. Okay, so we've got red lines, so these are our rapid moves. We've got blue lines, so those are your plunge moves. We've got green lines, that's where the tool retracts. And then we've got these dark blue lines that you can see pretty much filling out the majority of this space, and this is actually the feed of the tool. If you take a look in our preview toolpaths form, you can see we're currently looking at our material as if it was a solid colour. So if we wanted to, we could say we'd like to see this represented in maybe a wood, okay? Or in this case, how I'd like to see this is in steel bright, as if I was cutting into a metal of some kind. Okay, and that will give me that representation over there. Before we go ahead and visualize how this is machined, we can also alter the actual colour of how we see this. And so you can do that by checking some of these options, in which case we're going to go ahead and say we want the toolpath colour of this to be, let's say, dark green, so that when we actually paint this up, everything that's machined away will be painted in this dark green colour. We can use the option here to animate the preview, and we can draw the tool as well. So this will basically animate the preview of what will happen when we actually machine this. And by drawing the tool, we actually see that tool in action as part of that animation. So we're going to make sure those are both checked like so. And then we can simply preview that toolpath, whereby if we wanted to, we could just decrease that speed and then go ahead and preview that toolpath. And then we could also increase that so we get a quicker representation of how that is going to be machined. So now that that's done, we can actually see what our part would look like if we was to machine this on our CNC. And so that's the beauty of our Toolpath Preview, is we're able to visualize exactly what we're going to get before we set up our material and spend time actually machining that. So if it looks okay here, you're good to go. If there's something you didn't quite like here, then at this stage you can edit your toolpaths until you got it to a stage that you're happy with within this Toolpath Preview. So I'm going to go ahead and press close. So next up, we're going to look at creating a cutout for our sign, in which case we're going to look at using the profile toolpath. So to do that, we're just going to tile our windows horizontally. That way we can see the 2D view at the top and the 3D view at the bottom. And then we're going to go over to Toolpath Operations, and we're going to use the profile toolpath. So again, we need to select a vector to assign our toolpath to, in which case we're going to use the outer vector this time. Over in the profile toolpath form, we need to specify a start depth. For this, we're going to start that at 0, and we're going to cut all the way through our material. So I'm going to type in Z followed by the equals key, and that's going to enter that parameter from our material settings. So whatever our Z value is within the material setup, it's going to apply that here when we press Z equals. or we could simply have just typed in 0.25 within this box here. Next up, we need to select a tool. We currently have a 1/4 inch tool selected. If you wanted to change that, you could use the select option to open up the tool database and then check over the settings here. In this case, I'm happy with the settings that we've got for our tool. So I'm going to just go ahead and press close, and we'll just keep that 1/4 inch there selected. Next up, we need to specify how we're going to machine this toolpath. So are we going to do that on the outside of the vector, the inside of the vector, or on the vector itself? In this case, we want to machine around the outside of that vector. And you can see we've got a handy graphic that demonstrates that we're going to be machining, the tool's position is going to be on the outside of the actual vector itself. Then we can move on to ramp plunge move. So again, we could apply a ramp plunge. So again, let's put in 0.5 in here so that the tool isn't plunging vertically into our material. We're creating some diagonal move just to help the wear and tear of the tool. Now, if you were using a vacuum hold down system, or you had some kind of appropriate hold down method, in which case it didn't require you to have tabs, for example, double-sided tape, or the vacuum system, then you won't need to add in tabs. In this case, I don't have that set up, and I'm not going to use double-sided tape to hold this down. So I'm going to look at applying tabs to our toolpath, and that's just going to add in little bits of material or little bridges in between my sign and the rest of the material to keep it held in place as it's doing that profile cutout, in which case we'll then manually remove those tabs once the machining process is over. Here we can specify the length of our tabs along with the thickness of our tabs, in which case we'll go with a length of 0.15 and a thickness of 0.8 in there. So 0.08, so very thin tabs in there. And then we can use the option here to edit the tabs. Okay, so we can specify the number of tabs if we wanted to let the software just input the tabs by just using the arrow keys up or down, or we could simply type in values. So we could say we want 4 tabs in there. We have the option here to avoid corners and curved regions. So we'd like to do that. We don't want to put tabs anywhere near the corners here. So we're going to have that option selected, and then we could go ahead and press add tabs, and you can see it will just evenly space those tabs out. And if we wanted to, we can actually move those tabs by dragging on that. If we wanted to remove a tab, we could click on it to delete it, and if we wanted to insert more tabs, we can simply just click to put a tab in position. So I'm happy with the tab placement that we've got there, so we could go ahead and press close, and then we can just give that a name. So we'll just call that one profile and cutout, and then go ahead and press calculate. Okay, so in the 2D view, we can see those tabs in position over here. And then in the 3D view, if we maximize that and just put that on a little bit of a tilt, we can see it's going to cut this in 3 passes. And on the last pass, it's going to lift to add in that tab where all of those tabs are in position. And again, we could go ahead and just preview that toolpath to see how that's going to be machined. So taking a look at that, we can see we've got a good idea of how our sign is going to look when we go ahead and machine this. You can see we've got our tabs in position, which we'll just manually remove once we've took this off the machine bed. So once you're happy with how you're seeing your sign within your Toolpath preview, you can then start to think about saving out those toolpaths and running them on your machine. So to do that, we can simply go over and we can close out of our preview toolpaths form, and then we can go into our save toolpaths option. Okay, so we have various options. We can save our toolpaths on an individual basis by just highlighting those toolpaths, and you'll see that it will update here in the toolpaths to be saved option. We have the option to output all visible toolpaths to one file if we had if we were using the same tool, in which case we're not in this case. We are using an 1/8 inch tool for one and we're using a 1/4 inch tool in another. And so we're getting this error message telling us we can't actually save these out together because they're not the same tool, and we're not using a post processor that has a tool changer. So we're going to look at this option here. We're going to output all visible toolpaths to multiple files, okay? And so basically it's going to save both of our toolpaths that we've got listed here. We can see that in our toolpaths to be saved list. And then we can choose our post processor. So in this case, we're just going to go with this standard G code here. You're going to search the post processor that your machine needs in this case. And then you can simply go ahead and use the option to save the toolpath, which we can then just go ahead and give that a name. We're just going to call that one Avalon, and then go ahead and press save. And so what the software does, it will then save out both of those toolpaths, where it will name the toolpath Avalon and append it with the actual toolpath name, which I'll show you now. And you can see we've got Avalon _1, and it will list the number according to how your toolpaths are ordered within your toolpath list. Okay, so we've got Pocket for the first one, and then we've got Profile for the second one. And then we can take those files and we can run them on our CNC machine. So now we can go ahead and close out, and we'll go and save our files. Go to File, Save As, and in the project folder, we're going to call that Avalon Nameplate Getting Started. So that completes this tutorial. Thank you for watching.